Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman. I want to welcome you back to the old Seaman Cave Lair Studios. I'm back. I am home. I'm finally sitting down where we used to sit down and do these videos, man. I want to welcome you back to the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. Again, I apologize for my sporadic content and inability to get really caught up. I've just kind of been in a funk coming out of vacation and getting caught up with work. That's been quite hectic. I got a lot of things going on, in my personal life that wasn't going on really too much before vacation. I just got kind of knocked out on my swing, and I'm slowly getting myself back into it. And everything that went on yesterday, I thought it was, fitting to sit down here, because the last time I sat down here, I was talking about Mr. Spider-Man. And today, I'm going to be talking about Mr. Spider-Man because there was some crazy big news that dropped, reported by Deadline yesterday, that kind of made everybody freak out. So why don't you pull up a chair, man, take a seat. We're getting ready to dive into this Disney, Marvel, Sony, Spider-Man issue that came out yesterday in a Deadline report. And essentially what the report basically was Spider-Man is out of the MCU. That's what the feel was. And people, rightly so, kind of freaked out, myself included, because the idea that Spider-Man wouldn't be included in future MCU movies is just such a disappointing factor, as they're kind of building him to be the guy who takes the mantle for the franchises. With Tony leaving, Spider-Man is certainly positioned to be one of the biggest characters going forward. So all of that super upsetting, and kind of took people aback, because we hadn't heard about these negotiations that were going on for apparently quite some time. So what Deadline reported is that Marvel and Sony and Disney have been talking, mostly with the Disney uppers and Sony, led by Tom Rothman and Tony Vinciquerra, through new negotiations over Spider-Man. Back when Kevin Feige wanted to bring Spider-Man into the MCU, Disney and Marvel basically were like, look, we just want this character. We'll let you keep the movies because you own them. You own the rights. They'll be your movies, but we want to produce them and write them into our stories so that we can utilize him in the Avengers movies. And to do that, we'll just ask for 5% of, the film gross and all of the merchandising rights. Sony said fine, and we got 2 wonderful Spider-Man movies and 3 appearances from him in other films. Tom Holland came in Civil War and immediately was the best Spider-Man anyone had ever seen. He just fit everything that you need to check off on a Spider-Man character. He just hit all of it, which none of the other actors had done before. And not that they weren't good. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield both had things that were very, very good about what they did, but just didn't quite feel the way Tom Holland does. And the world's been pretty happy about that. And now Far From Home is Sony's highest grossing film ever, as it passed Skyfall, and it has made over $1 billion. And, Kevin Feige has a hand in that, and he now has a hand in the highest grossing film ever with Avengers Endgame. And when you hear that news that comes out yesterday, that, they're having negotiations, because Marvel is like, look, we are making tons of money for you guys. We don't want 5% anymore. And I guess there were some configurations thrown out by Sony, including just keeping it at the 5%. And Marvel Disney reported, it was that they wanted 50-50. And Sony said, nah, we don't want to do that. This is our highest grossing film. You guys are making money, hand over fist over there, man. I think they're up to like $260 billion something dollars from these Marvel movies. So rightly so, that for Sony, that's a huge ask to go from 5% to 50%. And yes, I understand when you hear that news that it's jarring and you're nervous and you're scared, but you can't be mad at Sony in that situation. Like I said, Disney is cleaning up with these Marvel movies. If you want to keep playing with Spider-Man, you can't go from 5% to 50%. I think that's too big of an ask. Now, it was also reported late last night that after all this had come out, Sony came back with a response kind of saying that it was inaccurate, and it's more that they've been told that Kevin Feige will not be producing any of the Spider-Man movies going forward because he's too busy focusing on all the new properties and different responsibilities that he's been given from Disney. The actual statement, which was issued yesterday, went like this. Much of today's news about Spider-Man has mischaracterized recent discussions about Kevin Feige's involvement in the franchise. We are disappointed, but respect Disney's decision not to have him continue as a lead producer for our next live-action Spider-Man film. We hope this might change in the future, but understand that many new responsibilities that Disney has given him, including all their newly added Marvel properties, do not allow time for him to work on IP they do not own. Kevin is terrific, and we are grateful for his help and guidance and appreciate the path he has helped put us on, which we will continue. Now, I think what this is just showing you that, what came out yesterday was maybe leaked by Disney, but these are all tactics to these negotiations, which are still ongoing. Nothing that I had read yesterday made me go, whoa. Like, Spider-Man's done. He's out. He's gone. I mean, yes, the initial prospect is there, and it's upsetting and it's disappointing. But then when you sit down and you think about it, you go, well, wait. Let's look at what's actually going on here. When you see this, news from Sony late last night, as Deadline reports, they feel that this is spin. They're trying to get back in front of this. Go, well, that's not quite like what was going on. All of it ultimately just means that these negotiations are still happening. Nothing is finalized. And even if it were finalized, I don't think it's as bad as people think it is. So I want to run through why maybe this isn't as bad as it all sounds when you hear all of these things. And that's because, as I mentioned, negotiations are still happening. All these things that are coming out and being leaked or directly reported, from Sony and all these comments, these are all ploys and tactics in the negotiation rooms because Sony rightfully wants to keep Spider-Man. It's their most profitable franchise. And Marvel has a ton of those franchises. So from Sony's perspective, it's like, we're not going to give you everything. And Marvel, rightly so, is highly responsible for some of the success of these films and wants more than 5%. And that's all understandable. And remember, they also have the merchandise rights. So I think these are all just things that are going to get us to a place where everything will eventually be okay. But if worst case scenario came down, and, Kevin Feige isn't producing the next Spider-Man film, and Marvel isn't, as tied to it directly, it's not necessarily a bad thing. First, Sony's track record with Spider-Man is not terrible. The first two Spider-Man films were massively successful and widely adored because they were good movies. The third one, all right, there was a little bit too much, meddling from the studio and forcing things into it. Didn't work. Things fell apart, and they said, they don't have a choice. They have to continually put out at least one Spider-Man movie every 3 years in order to maintain the rights. So they had to reboot. And that, I think, was the biggest problem. People just didn't understand why we were rebooting so fast, and they were like, Andrew Garfield's good, but the movies aren't great. That's really the only bump in the road. Since then, Sony is, partially responsible for both Spider-Man films with Tom Holland, and also responsible, sans Marvel and Disney, for the greatest animated film that any of us may have ever seen, and one of the greatest Spider-Man movies ever, with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So Sony knows what they're doing with Spider-Man, and if they still have Tom Holland, and it seems that they would want John Watts to come back for at least the next film. And, most things that we had heard would be 2 more films for John Watts to finish telling the story that he wants to tell with his, writing team of Chris McKenna and Eric Summers. And if those guys come back, well, now you have your full creative staff and all of your actors. The only thing missing is the direct tie to the MCU. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about the Spider-Man films. And if Marvel's not directly tied, having to pull these films into what they're doing, this gives Sony a lot of other options. It allows them to probably get a sequel to Spider-Man Far From Home out faster. And considering where that movie ends, it ends in like a traditional cliffhanger type way with those post-credit scenes, which I will still drop the videos that I filmed about them eventually, hopefully coming up here, and talk about those scenes. But where we left off, it feels like one of those movies that needs to pick up right where it ended, or like maybe a few weeks or so, not years. So we could get a Spider-Man movie faster. That's not a bad thing, especially, like I said, if the creative staff is still all intact. Now, if Marvel is indeed out and Sony can't get back John Watts or McKenna or Summers, then maybe I'm a little worried. But if right now, things hopefully would play where Sony would get all of these things back in place, and now you're just missing the MCU tie-in. This also would allow them to play with Spider-Man in the upcoming Spider-Verse movies that they're building out with all of the villains, right? They have 900 plus characters that they have the rights to. Sony probably is looking, going, worst case scenario, this doesn't work out and we sever ties, which I don't think is going to happen. I think we might see Sony produce some Spider-Man films and stuff that live in the Spider-Verse that aren't directly tied to the MCU, and then maybe, Spider-Man comes back around by the time we start getting into more of these films where people are starting to cross over. Remember, we're kind of resetting again and slowing things down. So that's not a bad thing. And if you could use him in Venom or any of the other upcoming films like Morbius or the Craven movie, which you would think you'd want Spider-Man in there, all those things now open up if Sony does indeed, sever ties with Marvel. So it's not all bad, but like I said, I think all of this is mostly just tactics and ploys to get, negotiations to a number that both companies are okay with. And look, I am totally on Sony's side in the sense that 5% to 50% is too much of an ask, especially when you know how much they're making with all of the other superhero movies they have going on and have coming. So look, I want to try to help myself by saying it out loud and help you guys kind of calm down a little bit. Like, yes, I understand if Spider-Man's not in the MCU, that would be extremely disappointing. But it doesn't mean that we're going to get garbage movies if Marvel isn't producing them or if Kevin Feige isn't producing them. Whether it's actually true that Disney is saying he's too busy to do any of the next upcoming films, or if indeed it is just negotiation, part of the negotiation that maybe he wouldn't be able to continue forward. Whatever it is, I don't think we should have to worry. I think Spider-Man will be quite all right, and at some point, it'll all work itself out, and he'll still be involved in the MCU going forward. So those are all the C-Man's thoughts on the Sony, Marvel, Disney, Spider-Man situation. Now I want to know what you guys are thinking. What did you think when you first heard it? Did you digest and then have different feelings? Are you outraged? Are you, not too worried? Where do you land in this situation? What do you think is going to happen? What do you hope happens? And how do you feel with what's going on? Leave all of those comments down below in the comment section. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the old C-Man, follow this Spider-Man story as it continues, please go hit that little subscribe button and the bell that follows so you get alerts every time I make a new video. The C-Man's Cinema Sit-Down. I'm the C-Man, and I'm signing off. Peace! Well, you guys are still here? You must be looking for some more content. Well, don't worry, C-Man's got you covered, man. You got videos like this guy, and if you haven't yet, and you want to come check out all the C-Man goodies, join the Cinema Sit-Down squad, man. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the little bell down below that, too, so you can get alerts every time I make new videos.